Dina Bowman. Dina Bowman completed a degree in Linguistics and Languages at the University of Melbourne, worked in a range of jobs including at the Women's Refuge with young unemployed people, women's health, disability organisations, TAFE and local government. She then worked in the private sector and amongst and had 4 children, so very, very busy. Along the way, she completed a postgraduate diploma in policy and law at La Trobe and a PhD at Swinburne. She's had various teaching and research jobs in the university sector and joined the Brotherhood of St Lawrence's Research and Policy Centre in 2009, and that's where she's currently the manager, where she actually manages a team of researchers engaged in applied and theoretical research, writing and dissemination, and she also teaches at the University of Melbourne under a joint agreement between the Brotherhood of St Lawrence and the University of Melbourne. So welcome, Dina. The next is Dr. Mark Feigan. Feigan, come on down. He has a Masters of Social Science, a PhD, and has worked for 20 years in different roles of Commonwealth and state government departments and bodies. And these include CES, DUA, which is the old Department of Employment and Workplace Relations, Department of Human Services, Department of Justice, FACS, and now he's currently at the Office of Public Advocate, and they undertake extensive amount of research with vulnerable populations and actually release some very cutting-edge reports that we cannot actually do in the university because our ethics don't allow us to do. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted Mark on the panel today. He's also the Executive Officer of a community organisation where he's been for more than 10 years. His career is focused on the rights of people with disabilities and the administration delivery of disability advocacy and services. He's currently the Senior Research Officer with the Office of a Public Advocate, and he's assisted and counselled job seekers and also recruited and appointed professional staff. His career has hinged on a combination of experience and higher education. So welcome, Mark. The next is Kathy Landvogt. I should have checked out how to say these names, it's terrible. Is Manager of Social Policy Research at Good Shepherd Youth and Family Service, where she has worked in research since 2005. She oversees a busy unit that provides policy analysis, policy advocacy, evaluation guidance and program design support to the organisation, as well as conducting independent research projects undertaken that have a wide engagement with community theatre to explore issues such as women's financial capability, to network analysis of service sectors and to more traditional qualitative and quantitative investigations of emerging needs. So welcome, Kathy. And finally, Sonia Whiteley, who comes from a private research firm rather than the NGO or government sector. Sonia has worked in applied social policy research and program evaluation since 1993. Sonia's research career has spanned academic research and evaluation roles, commercial market research and senior public sector research and evaluation. Key roles have included positions at the University of New South Wales, the Tertiary Entrance Procedures Authority, Education Queensland, the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute and the Department of Justice Victoria. Her particular interests include program evaluation, program logic mapping, large-scale survey design and management, and research with vulnerable populations and service delivery assessment. And she currently leads the research strategy team at the Social Research Centre. So in inviting these guys along to come and present an employer's perspective on what it means to employ sociologists, and to talk about that process, what we actually did is we came up with a couple of questions which I reframed at 10 to 6 this morning. So they're not quite as I had originally sent them, but it was the last thing of the schedule that I had actually forgotten to do, and I kind of woke up going, oh my God, those questions have got to be on the slide. So we're going to work through these general questions, and we are really going to run it more so as a discussion, and then at the end we're going to take questions from you all. So thank you. Okay, so our first question of the day is really to look at the issue of who would actually employ a sociologist. And we wanted to think about some of the kinds of organisations and labour markets. So what we're going to do is hand around the mic, and every person who wants to comment on this will provide some input into the question. So Dina.
Now, does this work? Yeah, Karen asked me this question last night, who would employ a sociologist? And I said no one, because don't be depressed. I think that it's probably really hard to find a job with a title, sociologist, but then the flip side of no one is probably everyone, depending. So it's around understanding and promoting the skills that you have to offer, being adaptable and flexible, and not only the skills, the frameworks. I did my PhD about work and family life of entrepreneurs, and then I ended up working in the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, which the focus is on inequality and disadvantage. It's actually the same framework, except I was looking up before, and maybe now I'm looking down, across, sideways and through, and up a little bit too. So it's being adaptable and flexible.
Dr. Talbot, I think you must be unique in Australia. Yeah, I thought in the public sector, I think it would be very rare that I'd advertise a position for a sociologist of any kind. Very rare. And what they mainly want is, in one way or another, the job title boil down to project officer, something very vague and generic. And so what you need to do is look for opportunities across the public sector where your skills are a match. So it's about using your research skills to understand the organisation and the position and what they need, and matching your skill set to it. So that's it in a nutshell.
In community organisations, community service organisations, there are researchers and policy advocates employed, and some of them are, I am sure, sociologists. In our team, we're a faith-based organisation, now values-based, not religious, so it's important to think broadly and openly about where the jobs might be, not assume anything about any particular employer, which I can concur with Stephen on. In our team, there are 4 of us. I'm a social worker by background with some teaching and a PhD that lent heavily on sociology. We have an economics arts graduate who worked in a bank, was the youngest bank manager in Australia, in Melbourne I think, for a while, and has done postgrad in public policy. We have a law journalist graduate whose undergrad was journalism and whose postgrad was law. And we have an organisational development psychologist who's currently doing a PhD. So there you have it. No sociologists, but you get a sense that if we can employ that diversity, then there's nothing to stop sociologists. In fact, I think the biggest thing, my personal view, sociologists bring to the community sector, to the world, is the ability to think system. And social workers do this too, but I think what you learn in sociology is a more rigorous methodology for that. And thinking system is essential in our business. So I think that's an asset, but you have to interpret it to the employers because they won't necessarily see that. And the other thing I just want to say is that we also employ some people who've done sociology, including postgrad, as direct practice workers, aka social workers. But that's because that's also a very diverse workforce, and also because it's a good way into evaluation. If you want to do evaluations, one of the biggest things I'd say is respect the practitioners, and understanding the practice is a way to respect the practitioners. That'll do for now.
We don't employ sociologists. We'd never advertise for a sociologist. Don't take it personally. We don't advertise for psychologists, we don't advertise for demographers, but we employ people from a really broad range of backgrounds. It's just a matter of matching your skills to what we're after. I'll just explain a little bit about our organisation and about our sector, because I think it's an area that people never consider going into when they've finished their studies. I work for the Social Research Centre. We're a private company based in South Melbourne. We're not attached to, everyone says, which university? No, we're not attached to a university. We work with a number of universities, but we're not part of an academic institution. If we were in the States or in the UK, we would be part of an academic institution given the nature of our organisation. So where are we up to now? We employ 45 full-time staff. We have a 135 station call centre that we use to collect the bulk of our survey, our administered survey data. We call them computer-aided telephone interviews, and no, they're not qualitative interviews, they're quantitative interviews. And in any given year, we would plot our way through about $20 million worth of research work. This means we have about 80 projects on the go at any given time. It's a mix of qualitative and quantitative work. Qualitative work is a very small but very important part of the work that we do. I never thought I would end up in this sector. It is the commercial research sector. It is much larger than our organisation. We're the only specialist social research organisation in the country, but you'll be able to do social research, socially oriented research, at a number of private companies. So I'm thinking about organisations like AC Nielsen, iView, Ipsos, and typically these organisations recruit through recruitment agencies. There's a lot of headhunting that goes on in the industry, and these are ads that you'll probably not even give a second glance to. It's a big block ad. There's all of these jobs pretty much across the eastern seaboard, mostly concentrated in Sydney and Melbourne. And what they're looking for are your skills. They're looking for your skills as a professional researcher. They're not really necessarily looking for your content skills, your specialist knowledge of a particular area. They're really interested in what you can do when you get on the ground to operationalise research questions. So a client would come to me and I'll take an academic client. I've got my ARC funding. These are my research questions. Okay, we need to collect the data. And I have to make that work. So, and something that sounds wonderful when they put it down on paper and they've got these great theoretical ideas about how this is all going to come together, doesn't work in practice. And we're the people that have to make it work. If you're interested in research as an adrenaline sport, it's an excellent place to be.
That's great, thank you. So, I mean, very different sectors really, but really very much saying the same thing, that actually what you need to do is actually consider actually the kinds of skills that you're actually trained in within sociology and how you can pitch that or frame that in relation to the job advertisements. And I mean, I thought it was interesting, Sonia, that one of the things that Sonia quite points to is a lot of these organisations are actually doing different types of research, some of which is funded via the ARC, and then universities are outsourcing to these different organisations. And I just wanted to potentially ask the crowd, which is a question a little bit different to what we've got up on this board, is the kind of linkages that they actually maintain with the university environment, and how does that interchange actually help them to understand the kinds of things that sociologists, such as yourself who are undergoing training, can actually bring to their workforce?
Well, the Brotherhood of St Lawrence has a partnership agreement with the University of Melbourne, so it's slightly different perhaps than other non-government organisations, although that's an increasing sort of pattern that we're seeing. And that enables us to do a range of joint projects and jointly developed projects. often there's the ARC linkages, and as a researcher in a non-government organisation, I'm often approached as a partner in a linkage, and I've been in meetings where my participation has been referred to as the funder, because a partner organisation has to contribute funds. The beauty of the relationship with the University of Melbourne is that we're able to develop joint projects from the beginning within an agreed research sort of framework and agenda. We also have a number of our staff in the Research and Policy Centre. There's about 30 plus staff. We have 6 PhD students, so it's a two-way flow. So our PhD students can be based in the centre. We've got some here today, and that provides exposure for them to the reality of an applied, mixed, multidisciplinary research environment. And I think that we're seeking to kind of develop that two-way flow so that it's not just one way. Nothing irritates me more than as an applied, as a researcher, I wouldn't say applied researcher, but as a researcher who's working in an applied setting, to be referred to as a practitioner. I think that researchers in applied settings can, we read the same journals, we draw on the same theoretical frameworks. The difference is that where I work, we have an aged care centre, residential aged care at the back. We have my office is above a healthcare centre. We're in Fitzroy, and so we're not theoretically talking about poverty and disadvantage. We're positioned physically, more or less. She's been to the office. she knows. No, I shouldn't say that. So yeah, so it's a two-way thing, I think, that we're seeking to develop with academia and people outside of academia.
Can I just say the term practitioner has come from the Canadian application of sociology outside of university. That's all.
I think it's important to note that for the large government departments, Commonwealth departments, that their state offices are going to be like an outpost, fairly limited, with some administration of policy functions rather than policy development, policy research functions. So the main jobs of the big Commonwealth departments are in Canberra. With the state government departments and local government, it's a bit different. They'll have the mixture of administration of policy and policy development and policy research and all that going on, but often within a regional structure. So a Department of Human Services, very large department, has a head office that has been recently massively restructured. The whole department's been massively restructured. So they're sorting out things there. I work in another massive department, Department of Justice, which has, runs prisons, has police officers, protective service officers. The Attorney General is the Minister. But I don't work for any of that stuff. I work in a statutory agency, a law that establishes the public advocate. So another kind of statutory body is, and there are a couple of floors above us, it's the Victorian Equal Opportunity Human Rights Commission. So you've got these little statutory agencies that have a mixture of service delivery and policy and community education and are kind of multifaceted. So I work in one of these organisations that is a hybrid. It sits in a space in between government and the community. My PhD was a history of the Office of the Public Advocate, and I did that. It was an ARC funded grant. I was a funded, I was lucky enough to be funded to do my PhD with the office as an industry partner. So the office has had lots of ARC partnerships with different projects. I think about 7 in recent years. I have a manager above me, John Chesterman, who's a former academic at the University of Melbourne. So he's on a lot of those committees and does a lot of that stuff. We have extensive project-based, issues-based relationships with universities and community sector organisations. But we are a funny kind of outfit. We do statutory protection for adults after an order has been made by the tribunal, Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. So I have to explain some of this to give a sense of, that we're a little bit different. So we got this role in safeguarding and protecting the human rights of people with disability who have a cognitive impairment. So that's people with intellectual disability or head injury or mental illness. It means that they can't make decisions for themselves. So we got that. It's not quite service, but it's not quite advocacy, it's guardianship. It's very specific. But the people who do that, I'm not one of them, the people who do that do undertake advocacy for people with disability too, as a less restrictive intervention to full-on guardianship where the autonomy of a person is taken away for a period. Now we also have 700 volunteers doing stuff. I actually volunteer as well as my paid role. I volunteer at a recent thing, doubling up, as a community visitor. So we have about nearly 400 community visitors who go and inspect basically residential facilities in different kinds. So intellectual disability services, mental health residential facilities, not all, but the ones, particular kinds of ones, including secure accommodation, and now it's emergency departments and hospitals too. It's complicated. And also privately run businesses, SRSs. So that's why we have partnerships with educational institutions like universities, but it's around specific things. So the community visitors, and I didn't mention independent, there's reports that go to Parliament. They are taken seriously by government, and they're listened to, and they're an advocacy tool that reports all the things wrong with the service system. So the research we do in our organisation draws on all this stuff going on in other areas. So we've got all this activity going on that meaning can be drawn of what's wrong with the world for people with disability and a mental illness. So we construct projects around that, but we're not limited to the kind of the data we generate. There's our linkages with community organisations and what they bring to us. So it's quite complicated and quite diverse, and there's a million things we could do. So sorry about the long-windedness of this answer, but it means another very interesting thing I'm doing, a lucky thing I'm doing, is I am a funder. I'm currently handing out $400,000 for research for projects investigating why people with an ABI are so overrepresented in our prison systems. And so I'm currently shortlisting 24 applications from some are just straight out of universities, some are out of the community sector, some are hybrid, a partnership, a consortium. So the people that doing this research, because we're in this legal framework, not quasi-community, with volunteers sitting in on police interviews with victims and witnesses and alleged perpetrators of crimes, all this stuff. Losing my thread here, it's a bit too complicated to hold in my head. I've lost my thread, sorry. The staff we have come from a range of backgrounds. So my background is, I think of myself as a sociologist, and but my qualifications are more like history and social policy. Our shared colleague, who's a really impressive researcher, she's got a master's in law. Another colleague on leave, her degree is, and for postgrad stuff is in economics. Go figure. And when I was employing staff, I appointed people with social science kind of backgrounds and social policy. So it's kind of not what the name of what you've done, it's what you can do. And that's what the central to all the jobs and that, it's what you can do, what problems you can solve, how you can understand systems, real important point, how you can make life easier without creating new problems. So with the public sector, often the question you get when they're thinking about who they should employ or what they should do or what innovation they should start to think about, it's the first thing they'll start is all the reasons why they shouldn't do something. So you've got to really understand that there's risk averse and risk management, risk mitigation, risk assessment. This is all part of the framework because of disasters in public administration, basically. And lots of reports of where things have gone seriously wrong and lots of taxpayers' money's been lost, or, people have ended up dead, made dead. And so the accountability and trying to make sure that that good things happen is like front and centre of thinking. So tuning into where people are coming from, understanding that they're not going to be too interested in your really good theoretical approach because they want to know what you can do, what it is, what can you do. Doesn't matter how clever you are.
Is that all right? I'm going to pick up a couple of those threads quickly. Go into the next question. Yeah. Skills, that'd be good. I think one of the things that you've highlighted, Mark, is partnerships. And what I didn't say before is a lot of Good Shepherd's work is advocacy also, is policy advocacy. Only about 30% would be research, and that's usually through externally funded projects. And sometimes we do employ consultants for that and researchers who are independent. So that's another way to get into employment. But we partner again through ARC grants with universities on issues like the moment hour, but probably only one at a time, unlike the Brotherhood, because they've got a lot more researchers than us. Everyone. They've got a lot more researchers. So we've got one at the moment, Melbourne Uni School of Law on bankruptcy. So that's because our work is around poverty and payday lenders and also family violence, economic abuse. That was our more recent project, and that was again partnering with another organisation. So the people skills, teamwork, collaboration, ability to be nimble, flexible, good to work with, a good partner, outgoing with networking, but at the same time inward thinking, reflective, quiet, research type, is quite a challenge, but that's what we're looking for. Those are the skills. You have to be at the service of the organisation and have a value base that puts you there, or you won't get work with us or with, and you also have to be a very good thinker, because that's what researchers and advocates need to be, and that means being a learner, always curious. I knew nothing about community theatre. I knew nothing about social network analysis. I've run research projects using both. I was a Luddite. I tweet. @GoodAdvocacy is our Twitter account, and you should follow it because it's good. But now I've done a conference paper on how I learn to tweet, and it's a blog on how, you have to, and I'm not young, so you have to keep there and keep learning and keep nimble and keep creative and curiosity always. So those are the sort of human qualities which cannot be overestimated, I think, in our work. In terms of skills, it's what everyone said before. It's not the content knowledge. You have to be able to get across new content quickly. It's the methodology, and it's not one methodology. It's not your pet methodology. It's not your favourite, I'm a beaut. It's any methodology that suits the question. And so it's about applied, it's not about pure. Want to be pure, stay in the university. Want to be applied, get out in the community.
Just to join those two things up, about 5% of the work we do would be, inverted commas, a typical academic research project. 95% of it is everything else, everything you can possibly imagine under the sun. About 30% of the work that we do is for the Australian government across a range of departments. We do a lot of work for what is now the Department of Education and the Department of Employment, but we, yes, we're friendly with a range of departments in Canberra. About another 30% is with statutory authorities. The statutory authorities can be anything from something like TAC or WorkSafe here in Victoria, through to the Australian Institute of Family Studies. And then the other 30-odd% that's sitting around there is everything in between. So we do a lot of work with not-for-profits and non-government NGOs as well. It's you never know what you're going to find in your inbox when you come into work in the morning. So it will be a combination of people asking you to bid for particular pieces of work. So we do a lot of responses, requests for quote and requests for tender. It will be people ringing us up to bounce research ideas off us. And it will be academics saying, oh, I've got to put in my application for ARC funding. Can you give me a quote to collect this data? It has to be in by tomorrow. And usually it's extraordinarily complicated, which makes life very difficult. In addition to everything that everybody else has said about we're really interested in your skills, we have another layer over and above that, which is we have to be very good at managing our clients. The skills that you would bring working in our organisation or organisations similar to ours are the skills that the governments no longer have. They believe that they can outsource all of this. So we're backfilling research expertise and research insight into the government agencies. And what we will often find is that you're not working with a research specialist in the government agencies, you're working with a contract manager. And they're just concerned that you've met your milestone deadline and what it says in line 3, paragraph 4, and you're saying, but we're mounting a multi-cohort longitudinal study here. It hasn't gone according to plan for a whole range of reasons. Can we have a chat about this? And they're not necessarily receptive to that. So there's a big education function that we often have to perform with our clients. Having said that, that's one end of the spectrum. We will also work with extremely experienced and sophisticated research consumers. So when I work with an organisation like the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, they're talking to me about stratified sampling and weighting procedures to 3 decimal places, and if I'm not on my toes, I'm going to be caught out. So they're expecting research advice, they're expecting research collaboration, but they're also expecting you to deliver really innovative and creative research solutions to their research problems at the end of the day. So it's a bit flippant before saying, if you're interested in adrenaline sport, come on down. But you are really making a lot of research decisions in response to the information that you have available to you. Because out there in the real world, when you're in an uncontrolled space talking to real people who do real things and don't necessarily conform to the questions that you want to ask them, you have to make it work. It's amazing fun. But what I think people totally underestimate is the value of the practical research skills that you gain in your training. It's kind of like necessary but not sufficient. I can't get a job just on the basis of the fact that I'm really good at running group discussions, I'm really good at looking at the logic of a questionnaire, but this is what we're after. I'm really interested in working with people who are passionate about research methodology, passionate about innovation in research methodology, and applying these things to the key social issues of our time, trying to figure out how to make things better for people in our community in a way that's incredibly inclusive. So if I'm looking at innovative research methodologies, I'll have a lot of the research providers now turn around and say the solution to everything is online. Whatever the question is, collect data online. That may work well for some of my Indigenous research participants, but not all of them. So what do I do to make sure that I'm inclusive, I'm meeting the client's research needs, and I'm also able to answer the research questions? It's a fantastic dynamic space, and you can bring all of your training to bear on those issues.
So one of the key skills that we seem to all be talking about today is really about the process of research methodology, and the other one seems to be about policy advocacy. I was wondering how you could actually describe to these guys about how they could actually present that idea on paper, so they could actually say, look, even though I did a PhD on gender analysis in public parks and how children engage with being pushed by men on a swing or something like that, but you know, how can I take that methodology, which was partly observation, so partly engaging with ethnographic techniques, partly around interviews, partly around maybe some possible focus groups and so forth. How can I position that actually on my CV to make that appear useful, not just to the research environment, but also in the applied environment where it really has a policy and advocacy focus? So it's not just presenting results, but actually presenting results with a purpose. So how can I position my CV in that way?
I think it's around a couple of things. Number one, I don't think it's just about skills. I think it's about conceptual frameworks and critical thought, and that's something that sociology offers. And so it's not just, otherwise we'd just be social researchers. Sociology is around specific conceptual frameworks with which we can critically engage with ideas, and that's important in an applied setting. It can be challenging in an applied setting, particularly if it's a political applied setting, because sometimes people don't want to be told things are complicated. It's much easier if you have a simple narrative. So that was one point. I think in terms of presenting oneself, it's around constructing a narrative that makes sense for the position you're going for. And that doesn't mean telling stories, but it's seeing a link. So if you've done research around children, it may well be that you start looking for non-government organisations with a child kind of, or parenting family kind of focus to bring that link. As far as policy goes, you do need to have an awareness of broad social policy, economic policy, and I know when you're doing your PhD you can get a bit narrow sometimes and just get very, very focused on the intricacies of a particular topic, but it is important to have a broader view and to see how your specific knowledge can be linked to that broader perspective. I think that's about it.
Your CV is going to be less important than your job application for the jobs you're going for. If you want a job as a postgraduate sociology or related discipline, you want a job in the public service, it's all about the job specification, the job description and the specific selection criteria for the position that you must address each one convincingly, so that the people reading your application are persuaded that you have the skills necessary to do that particular aspect of the job. So this is not about the best person for the job. This is about kind of the right person for the job, and a bit about procedural merit rather than substantive merit. So you have to engage with the process and tick all the boxes and not leave them guessing on anything. And you have to do this succinctly, and because if you're too long, they won't I wouldn't, you know, when I was employing, I got to a certain time-pressured people, they stop reading if it's too long. If you send in a 25-page CV, even if you send in a 5-page CV, you're pushing it. You know, you've got to think about these people are potentially reading hundreds of applications. Best case, they're reading 25, 50. If you're applying for a graduate entry program, then it's thousands and thousands, and you would know this better because probably some of you are going through that. So there's screening. So you've got to make sure you don't, like a risk management approach, that you're not giving them a reason to stop reading or to put you on the excluded pile. You want to stay on the shortlisted pile. So to be concrete in your answers so that you can be not too long-winded and cut to the chase is really important. So there's devices people look for, and they will have in their head their own preferred model, and so there'll be a 3 or a 4-letter acronym for what they are looking for, and you can't read their minds. So it's a bit unfair, but like it's a game that you don't know the rules for necessarily, except that it will be done objectively according to a process, and you'll be able to get most of it, but the particular subjective way you can't see that. But a good one, it's just car. So what you do is you apply your knowledge, skills and experience to a particular circumstance where you really, for this criteria, you nailed it. And it might be a voluntary role you did, it might be something from your studies, it might be something from your personal life, it might be something from working at McDonald's or in a professional role. As long as it's relevant, doesn't matter where, it's got to be relevant, it has to be recent. It can't be 5 years ago, it really needs to be in the last year or two. Best in the last 6 months to a year, because they're worried about that your skill's been lost through time. So it's a recent demonstration of your skill. So circumstance, what it was that you were dealing with, the problem situation, then action, what did you do to fix it, your role, and it's complicated, you might have been part of a team, so your role within the team, and then the result, and it's got to be a good result. Or it might have been something that went really pear-shaped, but the learning from it anyway, and what this, as part of the explanation of the circumstance, it might be that the problem wasn't understood properly. You know. So whatever, this is the kind of approach, practical, pragmatic, what are they looking for, how can I answer in the fewest words possible and get across how good I am.
I think you've been looking at my notes, but saying it better, I'm going to remember that one card. the HR department often are the first to read the applications. They won't get through to me or whoever unless you address, and they have ticked the box next to key selection criteria. The number of applications which do not address key selection criteria are staggering. Also, spelling mistakes. There is nothing more off-putting than seeing shepherd spelt shepherd, and it's happened too often. Get someone to proofread, check, because those things matter in the end. You think, oh, not very good at detail. Oops, I don't want to be proofreading everything this person writes. You know, I don't want to be correcting spelling. So I agree with, won't repeat what you've said, Mark. I think in terms of making the most, you're coming back to your question, Karen, and making the most of what it is that you've got to offer, look at what you've done and break it down into parts. Don't think I've never done that role. Look at the key selection criteria, and every word we write in that matters. If we say demonstrated, we mean demonstrated. If we say potential to contribute, we mean potential to contribute. We don't mean something else. So every word matters. Take note. You should be able to do that. You're researchers, so it shouldn't be hard. Finally, look at how you can value add. So, it might be that you've done some extra stuff. You are good at group facilitation, because you've done lots of teaching or something. Make sure you weave it in there, because organisations are often looking for someone who's ready to put themselves at the disposal of the whole organisation, not just in a narrow role. Yeah. Give you time to add.
Thank you, because I'm probably going to say something very heretical here. Excellent, yes. Your postgraduate studies probably haven't prepared you very well at all to be working in an organisation like ours. We find that people put in applications after they've finished PhDs and they think a PhD is a death blow. That's it, I've got a PhD, it's a research organisation, tick, I'm in. And often present themselves in a very narrow fashion, talking a lot about their PhD, a lot about what they've done, and not a lot about what this means for the organisation, and again, what value they can bring to the organisation. I'm more interested in seeing someone who's passionate and interested, and I am a research methodologist, so about research methodology. You may know nothing about nothing, but if you can demonstrate to me that you're interested, you want to learn, you're keen, that goes such a long way. There is a particular type of arrogance that often comes across in PhD applicant submissions to us, and they don't get past HR, which is really unfortunate, because I do think we're missing out on a lot of good people who are out there. But and this is really a bit mean of me asking you to do this, but you've been so absorbed in this enterprise for such a long period of time now, there is nothing else in the world. So that is all you can communicate. So it really is taking a good step back and having a look at what else can I bring to the table. We find that if somebody comes in with a postgraduate qualification, we often spend between, and this is probably difficult to hear as well, between 2 to 3 years teaching them how to be a practical researcher. The training that you've had does not equip you well for the type of work that we do, which is, I think we do the majority of the large-scale data collection in the country for social research. So we consider ourselves to be the commercial ABS. So if the Australian Bureau of Statistics would have an interest in this area but they don't do this type of work, we are definitely the next best thing in terms of rigour and research methodology. We hire all across the spectrum. So we have an extraordinary number of university students who work with us in the call centre, and that is the most unbelievable, fantastic exposure to a very wide range of research projects and research issues. You speak to the most amazing variety of people. One day you'll be speaking to a university graduate, the next day you'll be speaking to somebody whose children are under a child protection order, the next day you could be speaking to someone who has just recently broken up from a relationship and we're evaluating family law reform. We're doing evaluations for paid parental leave. We're doing evaluations for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. We do a lot of large-scale community interviewing to temperature take, a whole range of things. We contribute to Community Indicators Victoria. It's research boot camp. That type of experience, you think, oh, I'm just working in a call centre. Absolutely not. It's absolutely invaluable. And then we're hiring all the way through from project managers, which is a job title that you may not necessarily think is directly relevant to you, but that's how our methodologists get started, right up through to research director.
You guys have talked a lot about skill sets, a passion for methodology and research, etc., etc. I think that there's a flip side to it, and I think you might have sort of alluded to it. There's an economic side to the process as well. There's kind of competitive tendering. There's a whole lot of things like that. How important is that in a sort of an application, a CV, to demonstrate, you know, major efficiency time-wise, funds management, or any of that sort of stuff?
There's the project management is really, really important to be able to demonstrate that you've got good project management skills, time management. If you've got a track record of raising funds successfully for research, very, very important. Because otherwise I have to do it all, and I don't want to.
I would expect basics around project management, time management, people who can demonstrate very exciting things like attention to detail. Oh, spelling goes a long way. And this is another really mean thing I do, but if I get your CV, I actually look at it with the non-printing characters on in Word, so I can see whether you can lay out a document properly. Yeah, I know, that's me. Because that's something I have to do. If you don't do it for me, I have to do it myself, so we have to get all of our documents to publication standard. When I'm working with government clients, if they look at spelling errors, they look at people who don't know how to set a margin in a document and they think it's poor quality. You know, eye on the prize, people, but these are the sort of things that we need to take off the table so they can look at the research that we're putting forward and making sure that, you know, they're not getting distracted by all these little teeny tiny things. Again, you don't have to demonstrate project management skills necessarily in a research context, and somebody who's gone the extra mile when they're responding to selection criteria to put forward a diverse range of examples, you know, gives us a really interesting application to look at. If somebody is applying for a more senior position, then things like, yes, do you have a track record with funding? Do you have clients that you're going to bring with us, and connections and opportunities? But if you're trying to get a foot in the door, they're not things that you need to be worried about.
I only had just one small thing to add. It's not actually about your CV, it's about your application. Your CV will be used as a reference to check that what you're saying you can do, you did actually, were in that role at that time, or maybe something to follow up in interview. But it's not about what you know, how much you put in the CV, it's about how you put the basics down there and then reference it in your application.
I'd actually disagree, because we get a lot of applications, and honestly, if you have to read really long cover letters, you tend not to. So a shortcut, at least in the first instance, is often to go to the CV. So I would really, really, really urge people, don't have a standard CV that you just attach. Make sure that you you shape your CV for the job to highlight the things that you need to highlight. Because, yeah, a lot of people just go to the CV.
I just want to say on the selection criteria, because we've got some contrary things from Mark saying that your selection criteria, you should be looking at producing examples that are relevant and recent, and they should be within the last 6 or 12 months. But then we've got somebody else saying that don't bang on too much about your research project or your PhD. You know, most of us here have been doing our PhDs for 3 years or so. We're getting to the end of it. Some of us might have experience working in different industries that goes back further than our PhD. But then again, if we were only to use recent examples, obviously that would we couldn't use older examples. So I just want to ask, how would you go about balancing those two competing priorities?
I'm going to butt in, and then I'm going to hand it over to Mark. I think it really depends on the nature of the job that you're applying for. Certainly when I applied for my role, I don't think the PhD was like a icing on the cake. It was really the other experience I'd had that made the difference. So it really does depend what you're applying for. I think with just the simple thing of responding to the selection criteria, you would be amazed at the number of people who apply for positions without reference to the selection criteria. That might sound like obvious, but obviously it's not. So, you know, just to respond to them is very, very important.
I think it's tricky because it's hard to fit everything into a life that you need to do to be competitive, and there's a lot of pressure on you, I think. It's a very difficult labour market. I haven't mentioned the climate of austerity that we're in with government, and so there's even going to be very few jobs to apply for in government at the Commonwealth and the state level. So it is a bit ordinary, and that means that you have to try and do more to achieve your goals than what you might have 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It's unfair, but it's the situation you're in. So what that means is that if you've got a particular goal or dream, a place you really want to work, a role you really want to strive for and succeed in, if you're clear about what that is, then you need to work out how you can get that supplementary experience to help you through volunteering, through placements, through some other way alongside your PhD. So if you wanted to work for me, like an obvious thing to do would be to volunteer as a community visitor or an independent third person or a community guardian, and people do that, and we got lots of students now coming to looking out for volunteer roles because they want to work with us. Community sector, that's a bit easy because they'll have voluntary roles and that. Not every statutory... OPA's unusual in that we do have volunteer roles. Most statutory agencies wouldn't. So it's, you know, how can I get the complementary experience and skills demonstration, because my PhD won't be enough, because there'll be other people with PhD, for no other reason there'll be other PhDs, qualified people applying as well. So how can I be better than them?
I just want to bounce off that. It doesn't really answer your question, but it's a point I do want to make, and it's about gender. So Good Shepherd's an organisation that works largely with women and girls in over 70 countries, by the way, but and has representation at the UN. We have a women focus. Research shows, do you know what it shows about women applying for jobs? A woman will see the one of the 10 key selection criteria she can't do and not apply, typically. So be very aware that you have to work harder to overcome any reticence, lack of confidence, you know, lack of self-promotion. You have to join the dots for the potential employer. We can't read your minds, even if we're highly intuitive, skilled people. So that's backing up some of what's already been said, but it's another point about gender for the women in the room, of whom there are many.
You're getting conflicting advice from us because we're in very different industries. So it really is horses for courses. If you talk to anybody in my industry, we will say there is a skills shortage. I've had a job ad out now for 2 years. I wanted a Director of Survey Research Methodology to take over my program of research in my large-scale longitudinal work, and we've given up. We even tried to recruit overseas. We had a couple of bites overseas with people who were closer. Now, I am talking about a very specialist, narrow area of work, but we have enormous difficulty typically recruiting. Even at a project manager level, given the nature of our industry, people do tend to move in and out a little bit. We're hiring 2 project managers at the moment. I know they're hiring in the call centre. I think we're going to be hiring for a senior researcher again sometime soon. We are absolutely typical in the commercial research industry. If you talk to any of the recruiters, there are recruitment specialists who work with market and social research agencies. They will tell, oh, Sonia, I can't get anybody decent on the books for you. If you become involved, and this is something I didn't know when I started working in commercial research, if you become involved with these people, be on your toes. They get a massive fee for placing you, so you pick and choose where you want to go. They will be extraordinarily pushy about the types of organisations that they place you into, because that's typically where they're going to get the best fee. Now that's very cynical, because they do try to make a good match, because they do have if you don't get all the way through your probation period, they will have to do a make good and place somebody else. So they want to do enough to get you over the line, but they're like real estate agents, they do not have your best interests at heart. So just be very, very cautious.
I'm interested in the job positions. Are they one job, one person, or do you go in for team applications? Could a couple come in as a job sharing arrangement, particularly if you're finding it difficult to get somebody?
Not with government. There's job share, but and it can happen, but it would be novel having 2 people come in for an interview. Look, those, I don't see why not, but there would be just like the novelty of it would kind of have to be dealt with. I'm not an HR expert, you know, I don't work in HR, so I can't give you a proper answer either.
Yeah, it would be novel, and I think if you've got a range of other options as an employer, you'd probably, unless it was outstanding, you probably wouldn't be interested. I think that if you're wanting a sort of flexible arrangements, I just put in a straightforward application, get the offer, then seek flexibility. But don't put that as a barrier, because it will knock you out.
In our industry, it is so fast-paced and so full-on, and clients believe that they are paying so much money for your professional services, they expect you to be there 24/7, even if they're not. So we quite often work with clients who are on job share, part-time, flexible arrangements, but they expect us to be there when they are not. So even part-time in our industry is quite unusual. And you'll find that sometimes at a senior level you can negotiate a part-time position, again, after you've gotten your foot in the door, because people are so desperate to get people. But it's very tricky, and our work is very invasive in your life. There is a massive work-life balance myth. So if you wanted to come into commercial research part-time, you would often find it gradually taking over the other days that you were not in the office. Sorry, sad but true.
The community sector, on the other hand, usually doesn't have enough money to employ you full-time. So perfect. Yeah, I think, though, in answer to your question, wherever we are, there is an increasing kind of compliance, managerialism, you know, the dominant paradigm that we're all subjected to, and we try and work with our HR, you know, and if they're going to put barriers in the way, we don't have time. So I agree with what Donna said, just make it easier for us and then work with it later.
I just wanted to say thank you very much for all your advice this afternoon, but in particular, did you have any advice for people who might be looking at interstate applications where you don't necessarily have the opportunity to volunteer and do smaller entry-level positions simply because you would need to establish a lifestyle to be able to facilitate that? So when you're reading through applications in regards to interstate, is there anything that you would advise to include or work on?
Certainly, there was a position just a little while ago, and we got a number of interstate applications, and I think it's important to explain why you're prepared to move interstate, certainly for my organisation, because sometimes it does raise a question mark, and that's the thing. When you're doing an application, you don't want to raise question marks in the reviewers' minds, because if there's a question mark, you think, they really can't, blah, blah, blah. So you want to make it easy for people, and I think that's the thing, is if whatever your situation is, explain it. So there are no question marks and there are no gaps in the reader's mind, so they can go, it feels a bit dodgy. So that's what I'd say.
I probably overstated it before when I said, people volunteer with us because they want to work with us. I probably should have said it in the field and in related jobs, So if you're living in somewhere else, you can't, you can find like opportunities and that somehow match in your chosen field, your vocation. That if you have a calling and you know what it is, then you'll know what kind of things you want to do, because they'll be part of your imagination and your experience. So you will work that out based on your own situation. So there isn't a thing, like for those kind of things, there isn't a compulsory thing. It's about what makes sense and what makes sense in your application. So sense to you and sense to the people reading. Why should we employ this person?
Just one thought, and it applies to everyone, be employment ready. And for example, if you were moving to Victoria, you would need a Working with Children check card, and if you have that ready, that's 6 weeks that the employer doesn't have to wait to employ you. So police checks, Working with Children checks, if you're going to move interstate, then check out what the minimum requirements are there and get it ready, and that demonstrates also that you're serious in your commitment.
For us, you don't necessarily have to have had local experience, so we're not looking for anything specific that you have to have, or even having had Victorian context. A lot of our clients are Victorian. That's okay, we can all learn that together on the run. And if you're going to move interstate or even internationally for that matter, we assume that you're all grown-ups and you've sorted out whatever you need to sort out before you made the application.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank our panellists this afternoon, but before we actually head off, Alan has one thing that he'd like to make a comment on about the panel this afternoon.
Just one thing, not to put in your application. I advertised for a sociologist as a research assistant at one time, and I got this application which said, "I have done a course in sociology, therefore I know all about it." They didn't get the job.
Thanks, Alan. Okay, and Sonia, actually, at Morning Tea, we discussed that she has 2 entry-level...
Project manager positions. Yeah. Do you want to... And when I say entry-level positions, they would normally be pitched at somebody who had a solid undergraduate qualification and possibly a little bit of experience in the industry. If we see somebody who comes in with a postgraduate qualification, we would be looking at that person with a view to fast-tracking them if they met the other selection criteria. Some people are afraid that if they take what they perceive to be a step back in the job market, it's going to count against them. Commercial research is such an accelerated industry that it would be time extremely well spent and you're gaining portable skills.